Hello, everybody, again. It's been quite a while, but what we're going to be discussing today is uh, how to effectively use a database for a project, um, and how to use a couple of the files that I'm providing for a final that is connected and effective and efficient. So let's have a look at a couple things that I have to have running first. The first is MEMP. You got to have your MEMP running so that you have access to your MySQL server, which is where your databases are going to be hosted locally on your own computer. If you want to connect to an external database, a database that's somewhere on some server on the internet, um, then you'll have to modify the dbcon file that I've provided to you. So let's look at the files that we're going to see. So the first thing that you're going to need to have is a new project. I'm calling mine Quick Game. I right click, go to Properties, Java Build Path, Libraries, Add External Jars, and then you're looking for this file, the one that you've had access to. Once it's there, click OK. And you'll notice that we have a file called dbcon. You also have a player.java file, which I provided on Haiku, and a grid game file, which we'll be discussing shortly. Before I get started, let's quickly review dbcon. So this is simply a file that enables easy querying of a database. It uses the JDBC driver that we've imported as an external jar. And we are accessing the database at this URL. Notice how it says localhost 3306 is the port. That's the standard MySQL port if you have this on an external server, or if you have this on a different port, this string is going to change somewhat. Now, standard password and username are root for MySQL. Change this to whatever you have on your machine, which most likely, if you haven't changed anything, is going to be those two values. So in general, you're not going to touch this, but I just want to review some features really quickly. To create a new database connection, you just need the location. The location is going to be the name of your database. So if I have a database called games, that's what I'm passing in as the location. We'll see the use of this a little bit later. You have the update function, which takes in a string of some statement and executes the update. You also have a query function that you're going to use for things like select, and that will simply execute the query in a very similar way. You're passing in a query string, it gets past the query statement, and then you get back a result set, a bunch of information that you can move through. Then finally, we have a close method, which just does a safe close of our connection. Let's look at the player class. So the player class is somewhat more robust since we last saw it, and you're going to want to look through it carefully, and eventually you're going to have to comment this. So we have some variables that are useful for a player in a standard adventure RPG, with mana and hit points and lives and name. And we're treating our name as sort of the primary key of our database, so every saved game is going to be unique by name. We have a constructor that sets defaults. We have a constructor that takes in values that are predefined. And we have these things that can change, get our values, and modify our values that are stored up here. This is useful for a few reasons, but for the most part today we won't need that information. Now we also have the methods we were working on in class. One of them is called read from database with a string, and that string is going to be the name of the player you want to find. So the whole point of read from database is to populate this player object to fill it with information from our saved game table. And the reason we're doing this is because we want to be able to see and get information from a game that we've played before. So we can start off where we left off. And as we do this, we're going to be looking at our game database and our saved table in that database. So if I were to just run this and I hadn't created the database, you'd get a whole bunch of error. So let's have a look at this database really quickly just to review. I'm going to go to localhost/map. I'm going to go to tools, phpMyAdmin. It's quite late, and this is taking longer than it ought to. Excellent. So we'll look at a game. This is the game database. We'll look at the saved table. So the saved table has a name, X value, Y value, HP, MP, and lives. Most of them are integers, no special values. They must all be there. They must all be included. And the name, which is a 20-character string, basically, variable character expression that we're going to be storing to be the key of this table. So if I look at some data that I already have there, and you're welcome to insert some of your own, I have a couple different saved games. That have pre-populated data. I'm going to edit one of these just to change some values. I'm going to say the HP here is going to be 5. And I'm going to say that the MP is maybe 2. Let's say 2, and they're going to be 2 lives. And position is going to be 5, 5. And these don't mean anything now because we haven't written a game. But this is just to show a little bit of differentiation between games. So you'll see those values are different here than they are for this saved game. And I encourage you to insert data of your own just to test the functionality of this player class. So if we look at this player class, you'll notice that read from database is a select sort of type thing. We're selecting information from saved, in fact, all information from saved, where the name is the name that we've provided up here. And the way this would look in a call would be something like this. Some player that you've predefined dot read from database some string, and that string can come from somewhere, say a scanner. Now let's see what happens. We're looking through the first row, although technically this will go until the last row and it'll store the information for the last row. But because this is a primary key, you'll only get one row. And it says store the name into your name field, your name variable in Java, this one up here. That's going to get the name from the database. Then we're going to store the X value from the database in the X value in our program, the Y value from the database in the Y value of our program, and so on and so forth. And we're going to say if we didn't get a name, if our name stays empty, we're just going to set some defaults here. And sort of the way this is written, you're always going to have values, so this isn't necessary. So if we have no name, then we'll set the name to be whatever the player typed in. And we'll say that there was a game that wasn't found and that a new character or new saved game has been created. And this catch statement just deals with anything, prints out information if something goes wrong but doesn't crash our program. And finally, we'll close our connection. Now, we have something very similar in Save To database, and all this does is save a game. So in the game, what we're going to do a select again, and we're going to try to see if there is some saved value. If there is some value that is in the database when we search for the name, then we'll update it. If there is no value, if there is no value, we'll do an insert of a new row into the database. So the update function saves everything that we have to be the new values for that name, set everything where the name is equal to the name of my game, the name of my player currently, which is stored in my player object. Otherwise, we're going to insert a new name, HP, MP, X, Y, and lives variable, into a new row in the database, and we'll execute an insert. Otherwise, we're executing an update with this string called update. Here we're executing an insert with a string called insert. And again, if there is an issue, we do a print of where that issue might be. Finally, I have this toString method, which simply prints out all my player information. And so you're going to run through and you're going to simply download this from Haiku. And now we're going to have a look at how to use this. Okay, so I have a relatively simple usage of this, this player object. You'll notice I start with a scanner, scanning from the system input, the keyboard in this case. Then we make a new player. Now, this player is going to be made with 0 for the position, 10 for the HP and MP, and no name to start. It's just some default values. And then we want to say, for a saved game, enter your name. To start a new game, type 0. And so what we'd say is, read in their input. If it's equal to 0, they wanted to make a new game. So they're going to enter their name, and we're going to store it as the name of the player. So we're going to set the name of our player to that name, but we're going to treat it as if every other value is the same. It is the same as our default, so we won't change those. Otherwise, we'll read from the database. We'll see if their name exists in the database, and if it does, we'll store that to our player value, P. And here I print out P, and then at the very end, I'll save everything to the database. And this will be useful where I change a couple things, and you'll see that it actually is updated. So if I run this program, I start out saying, okay, enter your name to start a new game, type 0. Let's start a new game. Let's see if that part works. I'll type 0, enter my name. What is a good name for a game? Let's see. That. And so you'll see that I start by printing out all the player information. The name is Keanu and the lives are 3, and that ends my search. So if I run this and I want to search for a saved game, well, maybe I want to look up Keanu, the game Keanu, and it'll print out the information. Now this looks pretty boring. I don't know that this is something that's been stored already or what, or if my database is working. So instead, I'll look for a new game. I'll look for the game Max, which is something I've stored. And you know that we've stored it here in my database. Now, if I were to refresh this, you'll notice that Keanu actually appears in there. So it successfully got put into my database. So if I search for Max, what's going to happen is I type in the name, I go to this else statement, I go to read from database, and I'm reading the word Max. And if I look at my player class, what happens is, read from database, select all from saved, where name equals Max. Well, what's in saved? There's only one thing in saved where the name is Max, so it gives me that row. Store all those values in this player class, and then end. And so I'll go here and I'll see what happens. I've filled out my player with the information from the database now, just by typing in Max and searching for the game. Now, obviously, there's not been an update, and we'll see what an update looks like, and we'll make sure that our update function works. Similarly, if I were to run this again and type in Woody, I get a new value. Again, if I were to do this again and type Keanu, I'd get Keanu's information. Now, if I were to run this again and type a name that's not there, let's see. Game not found, new character created, with fresh info. Let's see if that showed up in our database. It did. So if we want to see why, we look at the player class. And notice that we already had a new player. And what we do is we just set the name equal to the name that we tried to read from the database. If the name was 0 after we searched from the database, then we didn't find anything. So we set the name. And then at the end, we do a save to database, and it saves it. Let's try updating something. Let's change some value of the player. p.set HP let's look at this function method. Should be capital H. And what are we going to set it to? Let's say 1,000,000. Why not? So we'll set the player's HP to 1,000,000. So we print it out first. And I'm going to say that I'm going to search for my game. And notice it prints out nothing. But if I try to open it again, well, I printed it out before I updated, and then I saved it to the database. So If I run this again, and I'll check my database just to see for sure, the million went in there. So if I want to search for it and it prints, I'll see that my HP is in there. The same thing would go with any of these saved files or any new saved file, saved game, not file. And maybe I want to do something like subtract from it. But the idea is that you read from the database when you're starting out your game, and you save to your database when you're ending your game, and in between you're modifying just the values in your program. And this is sort of from this paradigm of code creation, of program creation called model view controller. And this player acts as a model of information from our database that we can modify in program. And then at the very end, or when it's important to, we can save. But we don't have to always talk to the database. We just have to get the initial information, and then let it know the final information. Sort of like a conservation of energy program. So your goal for Tuesday is to implement a simple grid game of this sort, where to start out, you're just going to be reading from a player. And then on Tuesday, you're going to be doing we're going to be doing an extension of this where we actually can sort of play a game like what we've played before using this method. And we'll see ways to extend it. But your goal is to have this grid game file written as it is here, with possibly 1 or 2 modifications by Tuesday. Have a great day.